I've tried almost everything to stop these animals from eating the food I've worked so hard to grow. After lots of mistakes and learning experiences, today I'm sharing my top tips for what actually works and what I wish I knew sooner, so you too can protect your garden from all of these critters and enjoy amazing garden harvests. Let's get right to it. Today, we're talking all about different forms of protection, and not the kind you learned about in health class. To protect your garden from squirrels, birds, rats, and other critters, here are 4 easy and cost-effective things that have worked well for me. First up on this list is Baffles. Now, Baffles can be great for fruit trees, especially at keeping smaller or less agile animals away. For example, here is a mango tree I'm going to baffle in my backyard. This tree has some nice height to it on the trunk, and that makes it an ideal candidate for a baffle since it should deter some critters like rats and rabbits. For my baffle, I'm using something super easy that you can DIY at home, and that is a foil pie pan. I cut a line in half of the pie pan with some scissors, then made a little semicircle in the middle for the tree trunk to fit. I also spray painted this dark brown, which is totally optional because I previously used this pie pan for a tree in my front yard, and I wanted it to blend in and not annoy my neighbors. I'm carefully adding the baffle around my mango tree trunk and making sure that the little semicircle in the middle is wide enough to not harm the tree trunk or girdle it. If it's too tight, you can always cut a little bit more out in the middle of the pie pan. The next step is to tape the pie pan shut after it's in the spot you want around the tree trunk. This is the first step in making sure our baffle is secure. I'm using some packing tape here and starting by taping the underside of my baffle, then working my way to the top side of the baffle and taping that section as well. I'm taking my time to make sure the tape is secure on the pie pan before I move on to the final step here. Now let me cut this tape so I can secure the rest. The final step I like to do to further secure the baffle is to loop a longer piece of tape around one of the higher mango tree branches for additional support. I ran the tape along the underside of the baffle again, then carefully pulled it between the mango tree branches here, and then attached the rest of the piece of tape to the back underside of the baffle. Here is what the back of the baffle looks like. Now that the baffle is secure, you can see just how much space there is between the tree basin in this container and the baffle, which makes it very difficult for certain critters like rats to climb up the tree and steal our precious fruit. I also use the same method with larger foil pans that have rectangle shapes if I've noticed a possum or larger animal in the area and want to deter them. The great thing about removing these baffles is that it's super easy and takes literally a few seconds, as you can see here. Just cut the tape and carefully remove the baffle, and it's ready to be reused next year or whenever you choose. Here's an example I caught on camera of a squirrel being deterred by one of these baffles. And baffles have helped us get lots of fruit from our backyard orchard trees over the years, like these peaches we harvested. You can get the pie pan baffles I used for a great price on Amazon, and I'll put a link in the description box for this and any other protection items I mention in this video. Next, let's talk about cloche covers. So let's say you're thinking about planting a small seedling or plant in the ground or in a container like this raised bed here. If your garden or planting area is prone to critters, it's a great idea to protect that seedling or small plant with a cloche cover. Here are the cloche covers I use and have had great results with. I like these because they're cost effective, they're easy to see through so you can tell how your seedling is doing underneath the cover, and they have a mesh type design which allows you to secure them into the soil, which I'll show you shortly. Now, you could just place the cloche cover over your plant and hope no strong critters come by and knock it over. But what I recommend is securing the cover with some landscape staples. Here are the landscape staples that I've used over and over in my garden. To secure this cover, simply slide the landscape staple into the mesh holes on the front side of the cover like this. Then take another staple and repeat this process on the back side of the cover. Now, your cover shouldn't be able to be flipped over, and you can test this. If you find the cover could be even more secure, or you have some super strong critters, you can easily add 2 more landscape staples to the right and the left side of the cover to make sure it's secured in 4 places. When your plant gets bigger and you're ready to remove these covers, pulling out the landscape staples is quick and easy. And here's an example we caught on camera of our seedlings under the cloche covers that were completely safe from some rats that stopped by. The next form of protection I use that works is ultra-fine netting. I've used ultra-fine netting to cover and protect crops in my raised beds. Here you can see I added a couple garden stakes and hung the ultra-fine netting on top of them so the crops could grow and not be obstructed by the netting. I planted some carrot seeds in these rows, and you can see the bright green carrot tops above the soil here. On the other side of this raised bed, I planted some colorful corn seeds, and they have sprouted as well. Climbing up the trellis over here are some cantaloupe melons. This melon is looking great so far, and it still has a month or 2 left before it's ready to harvest. Several weeks later, here are my carrot tops continuing to grow. The ultrafine netting has done a fantastic job protecting this bed from different critters who like to jump up and dig around, which would disrupt the soil and my carrots. The netting is super easy to remove and then add back as well. No cutting or tangling or other issues with this, which makes the task of protecting crops even more enjoyable. And here's an example our camera picked up of a bird trying to find a way into our planter bed. Thankfully, this netting was a great barrier and he wasn't able to get in. This netting is one of the reasons why my carrots have been so successful. Here is one of my many carrot harvests. I also love using ultrafine netting to protect my blueberries. It's great at keeping small critters like squirrels, birds, and rats away. If something is eating your plants or fruit, I highly recommend setting up a little trail camera to catch them in the act. That's what we did, and as you can see on the right side of this video, a squirrel was consistently jumping into our blueberry barrels and stealing our blueberries. So we started netting our blueberry plants. This did the trick, and since then we've enjoyed some amazing blueberry harvests. This last form of protection is one of my favorites because I found it to keep every type of critter we have in our area from eating our fruit. And what I'm talking about is wire mesh bags. Let me explain how these work. Today, I want to protect some sunbelt grapes that are growing on one of my grapevines here. What I'm going to do is take this mesh metal bag and a thin black zip tie, and I'm carefully sliding the mesh bag around the grape cluster I want to protect on the grapevine. Next, I'm going to weave the zip tie between the front and back of the mesh bag, and since I have a trellis here, I'm looping the zip tie around part of the trellis as well for additional support. After I've woven the zip tie through the mesh bag to prevent it from being opened by an animal, I like to tuck the end of the zip tie into the bag so it's cleaner. And for the final step, I recommend gently pulling the mesh bag on both sides to expand it and give even more room for the grapes inside to grow larger. Here's a couple clusters of einset grapes that I also bagged. After your grapes ripen and are ready to harvest, removing the mesh bags is easy. Just use some pruning shears or cutters to snip the zip tie and cut the grape stems to harvest. Here are the einset grapes I just harvested. These taste amazing, and I would describe the flavor as a sweet red grape mixed with a strawberry. The texture is fantastic too, very crisp, and it bursts in your mouth like a little boba. And here's an example of how well these bags protect our grapes. I just went outside to check on the garden, and what do you know? Some critter managed to chew off, I guess, the grape stem from our interlocking grapevine. Or maybe they climbed our grapevine and broke it, which led this bag and grape cluster to fall off. Even though this bag was on the ground, the grapes look unharmed, and it appears the critter couldn't get to them. But let's take these inside out of the heat and have a closer look. All right, let me open this bag up. Again, I'm just cutting off the zip tie, this time with some scissors. Okay, now for the moment of truth. Will these grapes be edible? Or are there animal bite marks or claw marks, or are the grapes squished? I'm impressed because these grapes look pretty darn perfect. I'm just inspecting them on all sides and I can't find a damaged grape on this cluster. I went ahead and washed these thoroughly, and now let me have a little taste. Okay, interlocking grapes are some of my favorite green grapes. These taste so delicious. Also, in my opinion, the texture on these grapes blows any store-bought grape out of the water. Thanks to the protection methods I mentioned in this video, I was able to harvest these grapes and peaches from my garden. While I pack these up to share with our neighbors and family members, let me tell you about 4 garden protection methods that I do not recommend and the reasons why. The first protection method I do not recommend is using poison. This is because using rat or other animal poisons can cause other animals to pass away if they eat the rat or critter who has ingested this substance. Not only can other wildlife like owls and bobcats be affected, this can also impact neighborhood dogs and cats, and we definitely don't want that. The next thing I do not recommend using is open netting. What I mean by this is netting that has openings or gaps in it, like this one. Unfortunately, nets like this can be hazardous to animals, and they can get trapped or stuck in these nets without a way to get free. By using ultra-fine netting like I mentioned earlier in the video, I've managed to deter or keep certain critters out of different areas in my garden without worrying about them being impacted by the holes or gaps in open netting. At least that has been my experience. Moving on, I also do not recommend using certain traps. You may have seen the live traps that animal control uses to catch critters and relocate them. These traps are meant to capture animals without causing them harm. But you might have also seen other traps in movies or online that are meant to eliminate an animal, or the trapping method used might cause an injury. For humane reasons, I do not recommend using the latter type of traps. And finally, the last thing I don't recommend is feeding wildlife animals. Now, some people say that leaving a separate source of food for wildlife away from the things in the garden that you're trying to protect is a good compromise. The thought is that this way, hypothetically, the critters would get some food that you offer them that you really don't care about, and they'll potentially leave the food you do care about in your garden alone. However, I have not found this to be true. Unfortunately, when animals learn there's a food source nearby, they seem to not only take advantage of the food source you provide, but they also tend to congregate more in the area. Maybe move in a bit and then mate and produce more critters for you to worry about that can potentially impact your garden. Plus, the more animals you have in the area, the more food you'll need to feed them to keep them satiated, and that can be expensive and a never-ending task. In my experience, I've found it's better to focus on protecting the food I'm growing than to leave out other food for animals. If you've made it this far in the video, comment below and let me know what animals you deal with in your garden. I'm also curious to know what methods have worked the best for you in deterring different pests and critters. Now these garden goodies are ready to be delivered to some hopefully happy recipients, and my work here is done. That's all for now, but for more videos about growing and harvesting your own food, I invite you to subscribe and check out this growing food playlist I've curated on the screen here. Take care, and I'll see you in my next video.